Coming up here on today's Philadelphia 76ers now, the Sixers have made two roster moves. We'll talk about both of those players coming up here just around the corner. And Paul George sounding off on Anthony Edwards. Why? Well, you have to stay tuned to find out. It is now September, and we have an update for the most subscribers picked up under the Chat Sports umbrella for our NBA channels. Golden State Warriors today with 616, but they had a video before the end of the month that popped off for 70,000 views. So because of that, they just edge us, but we did our job. We surpassed New York Knicks now, and that's what I told you we wanted to do. So let's start September strong. This is your go-to spot and your number one home for all things Sixers. News, rumors, analysis, breaking news, watch parties, and more. So hit that subscribe button. And with this video, how closely can we get to 20,000 subscribers? As for those two 76ers roster moves, Philadelphia over the last couple of days, signing guard Judah Mintz and forward center Max Fiedler to Exhibit 10 contracts. What is an Exhibit 10 contract, may you ask? We have you covered because we always like to inform you here on this program. It is a one-year deal with the minimum salary. It is non-guaranteed. Monetary incentives do come with that contract for staying with the team's G League affiliate, and those contracts can be converted into two-way contracts, and the salary then becomes fully guaranteed. As for Judah Mintz, he played his college ball at Syracuse. He was undrafted in the 2024 NBA draft over the summer. He is 6'3", 172 pounds, and during the summer league, we saw a little bit of what Judah Mintz was capable of doing. He played nearly 19 minutes per game, 9.5 rebounds, dished out a dime and a half. Good defensive player with some good instincts and quickness on that end of the floor. Those numbers coming in 8 games played. And what Mintz showed in the summer league has this smooth mid-range jumper where if he can get into his shooting pocket off the dribble, it looks pretty seamless. He does have some foul drawing, savviness. And then, as I mentioned, he's kind of a disruptive player on that end of the floor. His college career, 2 years at Syracuse, in 2022-2023, he played in 32 games, 33.5 minutes per night. So used a lot. 16 points per, 4.5 assists. And then his shooting splits 44 and 30 from the field in three-point range. And what's the theme here with Mintz? Very good defensive player. 1.8 steals per game last year, or 2 years ago, and then 2.1 this past year. And you saw some improvements made with the minutes pretty much staying the same. Playing nearly 34 minutes of 40 in the college game. Almost 19 points per game. 4.5 assists once again. Shooting numbers, very similar, although the three-point numbers did go down a shade this past year in 2023-2024. So that's some insight there on Mintz. And then for Max Fiedler, he is 6'10", 235, also undrafted in the 2024 NBA draft, and he played his college ball at Rice. Good distributor for a big from the elbows and a pretty savvy post facilitator. He can run a lot of DHOs, which the Sixers do like to run with Joel Embiid and some of their bigs to try to get the momentum going for the offensive player who's taking that handoff, and maybe he can get that separation for a shot. Finished as Rice's all-time leader in rebounds, assists, assist-to-turnover ratio, and field goal percentage. Not really a floor spacer or a rim protector, but going into the draft, had talked about him a little bit as a big who can do some smart and savvy things and was kind of on that cusp of either getting drafted toward the end of the second round or being a UDFA. And with the Sixers Summer League team, he only played 2 games, so we didn't really get to see too much from him. 15 minutes in total, and he totaled 4 points, 5 rebounds, 4 fouls. His college career, however, very impressive. Well-rounded player. He played a lot in the college ranks. 148 games played. So very experienced player. 9 points per, almost 8 rebounds, little under 4 assists. And then he connected on just shy of 66% of his field goals. And Adam Zagorio with this, that the Sixers, at the time, August 31st, announced the signing of former Rice basketball player Max Fiedler. He became the first D1 player to record 1,000 points, 1,000 rebounds, 500 assists, 100 steals, and 100 blocks. So regardless of how his professional career works out, he's the only player in D1 to ever accomplish all of those things at once. And both these players will participate in the Sixers training camp sessions, and we'll have an inside track with the Delaware Bluecoats. And if they play with the Delaware Bluecoats, obviously, as we noted, some contract incentives there. So, Chip, two players who we saw a little bit during the Summer League, and now they get an extended look for the Sixers here.
Yeah, and two guys, neither of them are going to be making the roster or get any run with the Sixers this year, but two guys that we did see play in the Summer League that I thought showed decent things, and obviously the Sixers thought well enough of them to sign them to these Exhibit 10 deals, really wanted to ensure that they got these guys on the G League roster, and who knows, maybe one of them can get on a two-way contract with Philly. Of course, those spots are all filled up right now, all three of the spots two-way for the Sixers, but if one opens up, they can always convert one of these Exhibit 10 deals into a two-way contract. You know, Judah Mintz definitely struggled shooting from the field, and going back to college, hasn't been able to expand his game beyond the three-point arc, but as we said, can get to the mid-range and really showed throughout Summer League. He struggled in the beginning, but in those last few games, he was getting to the line like crazy, like a seasoned veteran, you know, with those moves that we've seen from players in the past. So good to see a young player at least have that staple of his game, something he can fall back on. And then Max Fiedler, just an experienced player, played a lot of time, and who knows, the Sixers need to call up somebody. They have some injuries at the big spot. He's a little bit different of a skill set than what they have in Andre Drummond and Adam Bona, someone that can pass the ball a little bit. Not going to be a big body down low, more of a, a 4 or 5 hybrid, but just a different skill set. Just another player to have in your developmental system for the Sixers.
So there you go. Some good contractual roster management info from Chip right there. Sixers making those two roster moves. And coming up next, going to talk about Paul George calling out Anthony Edwards. First, let's pop up this poll question here. The more intriguing player, who is it? JM for Judah Mintz, MF for Max Fiedler. I know we put up a lot of numbers, but I'm going with Mintz because I think that he has a better chance to maybe stick around at the NBA level with some development. So coming up next, Paul George sounding off on Anthony Edwards. Anthony Edwards taking a shot at some NBA legends. Stay tuned for that. Fun conversation coming up. But first, make sure you sign up with Prize Picks. If you're looking to get into daily fantasy sports, there are more than 5 million active members on America's #1 independently owned daily fantasy sports app. Prize Picks makes daily fantasy sports so easy, where you pick 2 or more players and you choose more or less on the projected stat lines for a season or for a game. And you can make the game more fun with Prize Picks. So head over to prizepicks.com/CLNS and you use the code CLNS to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Some future NBA selections or basketball selections that we like: Steph Curry, more than 26.5 points per game. Victor Wembanyama, more than 24.6 points per game. And then Domantas Sabonis, less than 12.9 rebounds per game. All of those numbers on average per game this year. So that's a good look at how you play Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. Pick Prize Picks today at prizepicks.com/CLNS. So the Paul George, Anthony Edwards story. Anthony Edwards criticizing the Jordan era, and Paul George wasn't too happy with this comments. Here's first what Ant said. I didn't watch back in the day, so I can't speak on it. They say it was tougher back then than it is now, but I don't think anybody had skill back then. Michael Jordan was the only one that really had skill. You know what I mean? So that's why when they saw Kobe, they were like, oh my God. But now everybody has skill. Oh boy, anytime it's new era against old era, it's never going to sit right with some of the players who came up watching that era, some of the basketball historians, some of the players and coaches who coached and played in those previous eras. This especially did not sit right with Paul George, who responded on Podcast P. Here's what Paul George said. I thought it was kind of disrespectful to the game. I thought it was a very immature comment. Obviously, Anthony Edwards is super talented and is a huge talent going forward, but just how much the game has grown and how far it's grown, you got to pay dues to those dudes that did it before us. And that's a transition or the translation between that era to this era. They don't really know too much of Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, and as players, you got to know those guys. Paul George, not the only one to fire back at Anthony Edwards, nor should he be. Magic Johnson, with this statement, I never respond to a guy who's never won a championship. There's nothing really to say. He didn't win a college championship. I don't even know if he won a high school championship. Luckily, I think that Magic Johnson actually said that. As for his X page, you never know if it's actually him. So think about that era, right? Way back in the day. Like, Michael Jordan was skilled. Larry Bird was very highly skilled. Charles Barkley was full of unique skills. Magic Johnson, extremely gifted. Even like Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain back in the day, they had unbelievable amounts of skill. Was it a different era? Was athletic training different? Was the competition different? For sure, but you're going to tell me Pete Maravich wasn't skilled? The dude was a magician with the ball in his hands, and he had a ball on a string. And it was unbelievable to watch a player like that play. You know, you think back to those Celtics teams, the Sixers teams in the 80s. You're going to say that Dr. J wasn't skilled? So you kind of take yourself out of having a debate when you start your comment with saying, I didn't watch back then. So Anthony Edwards says, I didn't watch back then, but they didn't have any skill. Nowadays, players are skilled. Training methods are better. Sports science is better. And I'll say this, like, the depth of talent in the league and athleticism is certainly better now, maybe than it was back then. But Chip, Anthony Edwards here, I'm going to say I disagree.
Yeah, it's always been a debate, especially over the last few years as the NBA's gotten more talented. People coming out here saying, oh, the teams now, they'd run the teams back, in the 80s, the 90s. The players now are way better. And I do agree with what you said, Chase. I think that the depth is way better now. There's guys 8th, 9th, 10th man on these NBA rosters that are probably better than the 8th, 9th, and 10th man back in 80s, 90s. But to say, as Anthony Edwards, MJ's the only one that had skill, there were no other skilled players back then, and I'm sure he was, exaggerating a little bit, but to come out and say, I didn't watch, but this is my opinion, he's sparking a debate, and he's putting himself in a position where I don't think he really wants to be, and a lot of these players clearly are like, hey, and Paul George included, you don't really need to be speaking on this if you don't really understand what happened, and the players that came up before you and set the foundation for this game. Without, a Michael Jordan, a Larry Bird, and Magic Johnson, it's like the game doesn't take off without those guys. Yeah. So, while I do agree from the perspective of there's probably more talent throughout the league today, Anthony Edwards, man, probably not something you want to be going out there and talking too much about, because clearly a lot of people have had the backlash, including Paul George. Look, we know Paul George is never afraid to speak his mind with his podcast. A lot of stuff that he's always talking about over there. It's a great watch. But look, Anthony Edwards, I can't say I agree with you, man. Talking a lot. Paul George, I think, was right to sort of put you in your place a little bit.
You can be a fan of your own era. You can stand up for your own era, but you can't disrespect those who came before you, because we saw some great years and great eras of basketball. 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s, early 2010s, and now into the 2020s. So which era of basketball is more talented? MJ for the Jordan era, P for present. Of course, one of those questions you have to bring up when a situation like this happens.